Can you be polyamorous and pansexual? Yep. And in fact, if you're me, you can be both and also be non-binary. That's right, y'all. I'm gay in all the directions. I'm potentially interested in everyone, and yet somehow I'm still single. You guys, I share these personal things because I never had a role model like myself. And if sharing my experience helps someone out there understand themselves better, then that's why I do what I do. Today, we're exploring identity beyond the binary. What is up, my witches? Welcome to the Queer Soul Alchemy podcast, a supportive community helping queer folks to embrace their authentic selves by exploring yoga, astrology, and spirituality. I'm your host, Lee Davey. Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host and favorite queer edby priestess, Lee Davey, your humble soul shepherd, your inner alchemy doula, your dad on vacation if your dad was a non-binary, polyamorous, pansexual, pagan degenerate. And in this episode, you'll discover what being non-binary means. And I'll share about my personal experience as a non-binary person who is also polyamorous and pansexual. Scandalo. That's right. I'm potentially open to dating just about any type of person. And yet I'm still single. That's right, ladies. Let's talk about it. But first, new episodes of this podcast drop every Wednesday, posted on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you're listening from, please help me feel like I'm not just screaming into the vast and lawless black hole of the internet by leaving me a like, a comment, and a nice little 5-star review. And make sure you subscribe, please, honey, because it really helps other queer spiritual seekers find this magic. Don't miss out on exclusive access to our free self-care resource guide, which I've specifically curated for you to support your journey with spirituality. To download this guide and be the first to know about upcoming queer yoga retreats and events, please sign up for our email newsletter at youareloved.one/pod. What do you guys want to hear about next? You can also message me anytime at that same link on our website, which will also always be linked in the show notes for you. And tell me your story for a chance to be featured on the podcast because your story matters and sharing our stories makes us stronger together. All right, you guys. So I want to preface this with a disclaimer that I am not an expert on any of these topics by any means. And while my yoga and Ayurveda training has included a lot of psychology, physiology, and neuroscience, even sociology, I am not in any way, nor do I claim to be a licensed therapist or a mental health professional. I always encourage just about everybody that I work with to also work with a qualified professional therapist. I am a holistic health, lifestyle, and wellness educator and also a huge nerd who's spent countless hours consuming podcasts, audiobooks, as well as scholarly YouTube videos and video essays that explore human sexuality, psychology of relationships, and gender. And a couple of episodes back, I shared a vulnerable episode with you guys about being bisexual and biphobia, and you guys seemed to really resonate with it. Identifying as queer in any way, but especially as being non-binary or transgender, requires a lot of self-awareness and understanding of someone's own inner world. And this level of self-awareness can take a long time to reach depending on a person's temperament and type of social conditioning and how they personally choose to interact with that. And this is not a judgment on anyone's character. We all have our own process and we can't always control our circumstances. So some of us are going to be at different places on that journey and it's all valid, right? One way I've come to understand my own experience with queerness is that in a way, it almost feels like queerness and transness is like the next evolution of the human mind, or like exploring queerness and transness feels like exploring humanity's ongoing evolution into identity. So my personal spiritual theory based on my own experience is that queerness and transness is a continuation of that natural evolution beyond identification within a certain gender or even the body, right? Because in yoga philosophy, we understand that these bodies are our vehicle, but they're not who we are. We say that our higher self is the one who observes both the body and even observes the mind. So you're not your thoughts either. You're not your mind. You're the one who observes your body and your mind, the one that steps back and quietly sees all of it. So in yoga, we have a body. Our body is like a tool, like our vehicle to enjoy this earth plane, right? Kind of like a car. And so we want to treat that car well and treat it with respect, right? So that it lasts a long time, that it stays in good condition, because we want that car to take us far in life. So we're going to treat it well and with respect. And then same actually with the mind. So we are so heavily identified with these bodies and these minds that it can be very, very difficult to even take a small step back from that. But that is what the process of meditation really does for us. As we begin to develop an inner awareness and inner reflection through the practices of yoga and meditation, we develop that self-awareness. And when I say self, I mean capital S, self. So again, that version of me, that true self, the higher self, that is sitting back quietly observing both the body and the mind. So I am not my body, I have a body, and it's a tool, my vehicle on this earthly plane, right? I am not my mind, but I have a mind as well, right? My tool on this earthly plane. We don't realize mind is a tool because we are so close to it so much of the time that we can't help but identify with our thoughts and identify with our mind. Our true selves are not the thought waves in the mind, is actually the thing that is keeping us from being able to access that higher self state and see clearly, right? So one way that we could also visualize or imagine this is as a soft, smooth, placid lake. And the surface of the lake is very still, okay? So if the surface of the lake is still, we're able to see the reflection of the trees and the sky and everything that's happening all around the lake. Then what happens if we throw a small stone into the lake? It creates ripples. And then when there are ripples in the water, are we able to see the reflection? We may be able to see it to an extent, but the reflection isn't going to be clear, right? The reflection is going to be obscured by the ripples, by the thought waves. So we can think of our mind like this. Thought waves are constantly rippling in our mind. And so many of our thoughts are repetitive. We tend to think the same thoughts over and over again throughout the day. And those repetitive thoughts become our truth. They become how our mind and our nervous system sees the world by default. So when we allow the thought waves to obscure our reality, then we're not seeing reality clearly because those thought waves are the ripples, making the reflection obscure. This is the process of yoga. The definition, or one of many definitions of yoga, is the cessation of thought waves in the mind, oneness, union with the higher self, with the universal self. So union of the individual, I am sense, with the higher self, that one that sits back and observes everything. And in that place, because there are no thought waves causing ripples on the surface of our lake, we are able to see ourselves clearly. So when our mind is calm, just like when the surface of the lake is calm, there are no ripples on the surface to obscure the reflection. When there are no thought waves in our mind to obscure that connection, then we realize that we're the same. We have that unobscured reflection. We see it as not separate, but as one and the same. And this state of union or oneness is another way that we can define yoga. But from a practical sense, yoga is stilling of the thought waves in the mind so that we can see that we are not the mind and we're not the body, but we have a mind and we have a body. And these are tools that have been given to us so that we can explore this earthly realm, the soul school that is our Mother Earth, so that we can live out and experience our karmas, so that we can do actions, which karma literally just means action, right? Why do we want to do action? So that consciousness can experience itself. One of the stated purposes of life is experience and liberation. Consciousness experiencing itself, and then that same consciousness being liberated from the bondage of the illusion of the thought waves, from the bondage of this idea that I am my thoughts, I am my mind, I am my body. Consciousness experiencing itself, consciousness experiencing matter and form just for the fun of it, and then liberation from that same experience, because experience has suffering and pain attached to it just as much as it has pleasure attached to it. This world of matter and form that we find ourselves in, the nature of it is pleasure and pain. There's a dual nature to it, or so it appears, because of the illusion. Where we find pleasure, we're inevitably going to find pain. So we come to this soul school, we've burned through our karmas, We are consciousness experiencing itself. And then through our suffering, through burning through our karmas, we learn our soul's lessons so that we can become liberated from our soul's lessons, liberated from our karmas, we could say, from whatever soul contracts we come into this lifetime with, we could say. So experience and liberation. Liberation from this idea that I am my body and I am my mind. No. Instead, we realize that we have a body and we have a mind. And in yoga, we also say that the mind makes a very good servant, but a very poor master. So through the process of yoga, we learn how to discipline the mind so that we can use that tool in a proper way rather than allowing our mind to master us. Because I can speak from personal experience when I let my mind / my ego, lowercase letter L, Lee, when I let that Lee run the show, things don't tend to work out. But when I let my higher self run the show, then things work out smoothly. So a little bit of yoga philosophy to set the tone for the rest of this episode, because I really wanted to ground us first in yoga philosophy and a spiritual approach to what could be kind of a medical or sciencey subject. So I just wanted to add some nuance there. So our higher self, as we've established, is not the body. It's also not the mind. But because it's not the body, it has no sex. It has no gender. The higher self sits back and observes, and it exists in everyone, everywhere, everything that is conscious. The higher self does not have physical attributes. It does not have masculine or feminine. Every tree, every animal, regardless of sex or gender, has that same conscious awareness. Humans also have consciousness and intuition, and humans have a very strong mind. And our human minds love to make things just way more complicated than they actually need to be. And our human egos, the sense that I am me, also tend to cause a lot of violence. Human egos, particularly. It's not in the same way that a lion causes violence in order to simply eat and survive, right? The human ego causes another level of violence, destruction, chaos, and trauma. And it's because of this sense that I am me and somehow superior, somehow individual, when that's not true, as we talk about in yoga. So if this earth is a soul school, and we could even say that our curriculum of understanding queerness and gender identity and sexuality is one of many entry points for a spiritual component to come into this. So this episode is about being non-binary, pansexual, and polyamorous, but it's really underneath that about self-inquiry. Yoga invites us to ask, who am I? Beyond the stories society gives us, beyond our cultural narrative or our interpersonal narrative. And the various LGBTQ plus identities become examples of that deeper spiritual practice to return again and again to the central yogic question of who am I really? Who am I when I stop defining myself by what the world expects me to be? And any labels that we choose to use are an expression of that self-inquiry. So whether you're cis, trans, binary, non-binary, questioning, or some other thing that you haven't found a word for, or maybe a word for it doesn't exist yet, yoga begins from the premise that your deepest self is already whole and complete. Okay. So to answer what is being non-binary, we have to first explain what is the difference between gender and sex. Is gender a noun or a verb? Is it a thing that we are? Is it a thing that we do? Is it both? Is gender a mythical creature? How I yearn for the days gone by when jobs were still mandating DEI sensitivity training. Far-right propaganda these days really has people flinching at the mere mention of pronouns, like a third grader who had played Mario Kart for 3 hours the night before when their language arts teacher tells the class to hand in last night's homework for grading. Seriously though, word on the street is that a person's sex describes their biology and physical body. Meanwhile, gender describes our identity, how we relate to our bodies, how we relate to others in relationships, and how we relate to the social constructs of gender roles. Some people emphasize that gender is socially constructed, particularly the expectations and roles our culture attaches to masculinity and femininity in quotes, as well as these social expectations and gender roles associated with having a certain gender identity. So I definitely agree that there are gender roles that are social constructs, which can be very oppressive. And I believe that trans and non-binary people are born trans and non-binary. So they therefore need to have physical and often medical accommodations to improve their condition if they so choose to do that. Some folks within the queer community are really pushing a narrative that gender is only a social construct and it's only a performance that is enforced by the patriarchy, which, don't get me wrong, the patriarchy definitely does benefit from and enforce strict gender roles and so-called traditional family values. Yes. However, if we say that gender is only based on socialization and it's only a social construct and it's not rooted in biology, I just feel like that's a slippery slope that could be used to undermine transgender folks' access to gender affirming medical care. After all, it's so much easier to dismiss a trans person's suffering as like, oh, that's all in your head, if queer people themselves are also saying that gender is only a social construct, right? Many transgender and non-binary people identify as queer, not only in regard to their gender expression, but also in regard to their sexual orientation. And the current scientific consensus is that both gender and sexual orientation likely arise from a complex interaction of various factors, including biological, developmental, and environmental factors. So it's multiple different things, including biology, rather than just one single cause. So, said a little differently, both gender identity and the sexual orientation appear to arise from a complex mix of various factors like biology, prenatal development, psychology. So, scientists don't really have a single explanation for what causes gender identity, or therefore, like what causes transness or a variation of gender identity. And honestly, I don't know that we need to have a scientific reason to be able to validate our transgender loved ones' experiences, right? We don't have to personally be able to understand something in order to respect it and have empathy for it. Cisgender and transgender people alike all love gender affirming hormone therapy. Like, that is something we can actually all agree on. So, this is why being on hormones does not actually affect what gender you are. Hear me out. Hear me out. So, did you know that most gender affirming care is actually used by cisgender people? So, for example, a cisgender woman that is going through menopause is still a woman, regardless of whether she is in perimenopause and sometimes still menstruating, or if she's postmenopausal and has completely stopped menstruating. Her body no longer makes estrogen, but she's still a woman. So oftentimes, this is a time in cisgender women's lives that they may also take hormones to affirm their gender and help their bodies feel better. But regardless of whether or not their body is making its own estrogen, or if it's coming from an external source, or even if it's not coming from an external source and their body just stopped making it, right? Because that's what naturally happens after menopause. It doesn't change the fact that that woman is still a woman. And then same with a transgender woman. A transgender woman is still a woman, whether she takes external estrogen or not. Now, many trans women do report feeling like themselves for the first time when they started to take estrogen. So similar to how a cisgender woman maybe would start feeling better if she is going through menopause and starts to take estrogen. And then same thing with cisgender and transgender men. Actually, the majority of people who receive testosterone as gender affirming care is cisgender men who are going through andropause, which is essentially the male equivalent of menopause, where production of testosterone drops significantly. Actually, the majority of people who are prescribed testosterone are cisgender men. So regardless of whether they're taking that or their body is naturally making it, does not affect their gender identity as a man. Gender is different from sex. Okay, so sex equals male or female equals referring to body parts. When we say sex assigned at birth, this is what we're referring to. So you may have heard the terms AMAB or AFAB. AMAB stands for assigned male at birth, and AFAB stands for assigned female at birth. And sex is, in fact, assigned rather than simply observed. This is because somewhere around 1% of the human population are born intersex, meaning that they have a natural variation in hormones, chromosomes, and or anatomy that may result in physically ambiguous genitalia or significant sexual anatomy variations. Intersex people are therefore often assigned male or female by their doctor at birth. And sometimes intersex people are even subjected to gender affirming care toward one side of the binary against their consent, as in the doctor will decide for them which side of the binary to push them toward and give them gender affirming care toward. Usually it starts when somebody is an infant. So we talked about sex, but again, what about gender? Like, is it a thing that we are? Is it a thing that we do? Like, seriously, can you guys actually tell me what gender is? Because I'm honestly not sure if I'm qualified to even speak on this topic. It really is so much harder to define than sex. Sometimes my gender feels like a mythical creature, for real. I feel like mermaids and centaurs are both very trans mythical creatures. What do you guys think are the most trans mythical creatures? Some days my gender is like Smeagol, and other days my gender is Gollum. And no, I will not elaborate. For the purposes of this discussion, let's say that gender is a binary spectrum, with one pole being masculine and another pole being feminine. Now, the dominant cultural narrative is to associate the feminine end of the spectrum with being a female woman and having a female woman body, and the masculine end of the spectrum with being a male man having a male man body. So, a cisgender man is someone who is born male and identifies as a man. A cisgender woman is someone who is born female and identifies as a woman. Then there are binary transgender folks who identify with the opposite side of the gender spectrum. Transgender men are born female but identify with the gender of man. And transgender women are born male but identify with the gender of woman. So, opposite end of the binary. And remember, this is equally true and valid regardless of whether a person has taken any steps to medically or physically transition their sex, because sex and gender identity are completely different things. And then there's non-binary. So for me, having a non-binary gender identity means that I feel like my gender is right in the center of that spectrum. I feel equally masculine and feminine. And if my outward appearance perfectly matched my inward energy, then I would appear very androgynous. And I've taken steps to become more androgynous, but yet the outside world still tends to see me as a woman and generally treats me as such. And this incongruence creates what's called gender dysphoria. So we could certainly visualize this in other ways, but again, for the sake of this discussion, I personally agree with the idea that gender is a spectrum, and that's mostly based on my lived experience as a non-binary person. But furthermore, I tend to see everything in life and the human experience as a spectrum, whether that's gay, straight, poly, monogamous, man, woman. And for me, I pretty much just tend to fall right in the middle of all of those. Like I mentioned before, from a yogic perspective, the entire multiverse is made up of what appears to be these binary structures, a series of opposites in this physical world. So, like day and night, hot and cold, summer and winter, up and down, here and there, Shiva and Shakti. But yoga means union. So, removing the illusion of that binary, removing the illusion of separation, and coming into union. So the final stages in the process of yoga involve literally losing that sense of separation to step into that felt sense of oneness with everything in and beyond this material realm, which is the higher self consciousness. So if we consider the yin yang symbol, there's darkness within the light, there's light within the darkness, and both halves are perfectly half and perfectly equal, and both need the other in order to be complete. So they appear to be two, but they need the other to be complete. So they appear to be binary, but actually they are one. They're not separate. And in my opinion, in this analogy, that oneness is what we're perceiving to be this spectrum. So whether you're on this side of the spectrum or this side of the spectrum, it's all one. And let me clarify, please, that in sharing my own truth, I cannot and do not claim to speak for the entire trans, non-binary, or LGBTQ plus community on this. The only experience that I can accurately share is my own. And there's no one right way to be non-binary. While I personally am non-binary in the sense of having all the gender, meaning that most of the time I feel simultaneously very masculine and very feminine. Some folks are agender, meaning that they don't identify with any gender at all, and they're still non-binary. And then there are still other non-binary people who may identify just closer to one side of the spectrum than the other, or their gender might feel more fluid and kind of move around on that spectrum. Point being, attempting to list all the possible ways that a person can be non-binary would keep us here a while. Again, there's no right or wrong way. There's not really an end goal to reach, and each NB has their own experience. So if you know any, or if you are one yourself, maybe ask them if they're feeling safe and open to sharing more about their experiences. And remember, when interacting with non-binary and trans folks, it's best to remain open-minded and validate their experiences, even if you can't personally relate. Like I said, you don't have to fully understand somebody else's perspective in order to simply respect it and respect their preferences and what makes them comfortable. That's what people do when we care about each other. And no matter where you fall on this spectrum, just remember that your identity is never a test you have to pass. It's a relationship that you cultivate with yourself and within your relationships. But the goal isn't to collect labels or collect partners. The goal is to know yourself deeply enough so that the labels, if you choose to use them, become a useful tool and a language to describe our desires and our preferences and our boundaries in relationships, right? Which is obviously very important to have healthy relationships. We need to have that relationship to ourselves first and understand ourselves first, because we can only meet other people as deeply as we have met ourselves. Many non-binary people also may appear to align on the outside with typical gender expression and choose not to take any medical interventions to alter their appearance. Because these people, in quotes, look cisgender or pass as cisgender, there's this confusion that being non-binary is not valid, like it's made up or kind of a phase, at least not valid in the same way that binary transness might be considered. Binary trans people are completely invalidated and obviously targeted as well. But I just wanted to highlight the subtle differences in experience between a trans binary person and then a trans non-binary person. And again, no matter if someone has taken those steps through surgery or medical interventions to align more with a certain appearance that would then allow society to correctly classify them with what they feel on the inside, a lot of non-binary people just don't necessarily feel called to do that for a variety of reasons. There's a lot to consider, right? And maybe a good way to describe differences in gender dysphoria from what I personally have observed in my friendships with binary trans people is that binary trans people tend to have a lot of gender dysphoria with regard to how they see themselves and their own bodies. And then non-binary trans people tend to have a little bit more dysphoria that is related to how other people and society perceive them. So because of that, there can be a little bit more motivation on the binary trans person's part to actually undergo surgeries and more extensive interventions. And last thing I'll mention is that binary trans folks and non-binary trans folks tend to see this entire subject of dysphoria and medical transitioning and hormones and surgeries just very, very differently. Due to our range of experiences with gender dysphoria, there is definitely some overlap, but ultimately I find that we're coming from different angles on this subject. No right or wrong, just nuances, right? So, like, for example, I am non-binary. I've been going by they, them pronouns for years now. I rarely wear makeup or paint my nails. I have had part of my head shaved for years. 90% of the time, you can find me wearing the comfiest pair of sweatpants possible, beat up Doc Martens, and a t-shirt. I don't use purses, just a fanny pack or another bag. And nothing about my actual gender expression is feminine, but my body is considered feminine by society. Even if I'm dressed head to toe in all male clothing, people will still refer to me as she and girl. Even though I've been on low dose testosterone for almost 2 years now, I still get misgendered on a daily basis. And yes, it still does cause gender dysphoria. Like, depending on the context, it's frustrating at best and can cause a great deal of emotional and mental suffering and discomfort for me at worst. But I will say that being on testosterone has greatly helped with the sense of gender dysphoria. And it's also changed my appearance to where people don't seem to treat me as super feminine anymore, or at least they can tell that I'm queer. If I still get misgendered, at least I feel like people can still tell that I'm queer. Although somebody did call me they the other day, just a stranger, and I felt very happy about that. Because usually I get she, heard by strangers. And then I feel like as a non-binary person, it's kind of like people don't necessarily realize I'm trans or identify as trans because of that. So sometimes straight people will talk to me and kind of vent to me about their experiences with other trans people or non-binary people, because I don't know if they see me as like one of the not difficult ones, but like people sometimes have vented to me that other members of the trans or queer community are, quote, like difficult or too sensitive. If you are a straight ally and you're listening to this podcast, I would just really invite you to please keep in mind that for someone who suffers from gender dysphoria, there are very few options to alleviate their discomfort. And the world is often just not caring and sometimes cruel. So if you or someone you know, someone you love, identifies as transgender or non-binary, please be kind and just respect their pronouns, respect their chosen name. Like, doing those very simple things doesn't take anything away from you. It doesn't harm anyone. It doesn't cost any money. Like, these are just small things that just require a little bit more effort and mindfulness from you to change your habits. But for that trans or non-binary person that you love, that little effort can go such a far way to just help them feel seen and understood and accepted. Like, that little bit of effort can really be the difference between life and death for some people. And it can really be life-changing. All right, you guys. So now I'll share a little bit about my experience as a non-binary person who is also pansexual. We've talked about sex, we've talked about gender, and so now we'll talk about attraction, which is again a different thing. And pansexuality is one of those terms that sounds a little intimidating until you just break it down. The prefix pan comes from the Greek word meaning all. So a pansexual person is someone whose capacity for attraction isn't limited by other people's genders. Now, that does not mean that I'm attracted to everyone. Being pansexual doesn't mean having no standards. It doesn't mean finding every human attractive. It simply means that gender isn't the deciding factor for me. For me personally, attraction tends to begin with somebody's energy, like their kindness, their curiosity. Are they authentic, confident, honest, compassionate? Do they light up a room? Do they make people feel seen? Like, those are the things that make me first notice someone and captures my attention. As a non-binary person, I've spent years questioning society's assumptions around gender, so naturally my attraction just doesn't revolve around gender. My brain doesn't automatically sort people into little boxes like men over here, women over there. Like, never has been a factor into whether my attraction to that person is possible. For me, it's more about meeting that person's soul rather than meeting their gender or their body. So I mentioned a couple episodes back, I put out an episode just about bisexuality. Highly recommend you go back and watch that if you haven't seen it yet. That episode was really a revelation for me, and we did more of a deep dive into my personal experience as a bisexual. It was a revelation for me because some people use the word bisexual and pansexual interchangeably, and I've always preferred pansexual because pansexual also includes transgender and non-binary people. But neither word is really better than the other. They just tend to resonate differently for different people, and bisexual just means attraction to two genders. Pansexual means attraction to all genders. But again, I feel like it just depends on cultural context, because bisexual historically has also been used to refer to just attraction to more than one gender in general. And plenty of bisexual people experience attraction regardless of gender, where plenty of pansexual people feel fine with being called bisexual as well. So bisexual is kind of an umbrella term, language evolves, and identities are deeply personal. But so for me, pansexual just feels the most accurate. And again, coming back to that yoga philosophy, that beneath all the labels, the bodies, the costumes that we wear in this lifetime, there's consciousness, awareness, spirit. And every being carries that same divine spark of consciousness, regardless of the vessel that it's currently wearing, whether that looks like a tree or a cat or another human. So if every human carries that same divine spark of consciousness, then to me, I'm falling in love with their soul and with their unique flavor of consciousness. If the sun is the universal consciousness, then each ray of the sun is like each individual person with our own individual flavor of consciousness. So I'm falling in love with that flavor, regardless of the vessel that it's currently wearing, the mask or body, or the thought form that it currently has on, regardless of what part of the illusion of duality it's currently representing. All right, so that's pansexuality in a nutshell. And speaking of resisting the binary, let's talk about what it means to be polyamorous. So, in a similar vein of like expanding consciousness, I feel a lot of love for a lot of people. I just have a big heart and I have a lot of love to give. And I feel love for strangers that I see. I feel love, obviously, for like friends, family, people that are close to me. So much love for like animals, so much love for like children that are just, innocent, just like seeing kids, like seeing flowers. And I feel like existence is love. And that's what yoga teaches as well, that divine spark of consciousness is love. So it exists within all of us. And part of being on the yogic path is removing those layers of perceived distance or perceived separation so that we can just get to that core of love underneath. Because all of the illusion of separation, illusion of distance, it's, remember, those ripples on the surface of the pond, and it's keeping us separated from our true nature, which is love. So when we come into yoga, when we come into that state of union with our true nature, we're just feeling that state of love and bliss all the time. And that state of love and bliss is yoga. If we want to talk about illusions of binary structures, another illusion that we're sold is that love is finite, and specifically romantic love. If somebody loves someone else, that somehow means they love you less. And that is so simply not true. If we just pause for a moment and take a look. So, what does it mean to be polyamorous? For me, it means that I feel a lot of love for a lot of different people. That doesn't necessarily mean romantic love. There are multiple different types of love, like platonic, familial, and then there is the romantic type. There's more of like a lighthearted love, and then there's more like a lustful love, and then there's long-term committed love, right? So as I discussed in that episode about biphobia, I personally desire multiple partners because I am bisexual, pansexual. So I enjoy having variety of different people and different energies around me. So let's stir the pot just a little bit more. Being pansexual doesn't mean that I'm automatically polyamorous, and being polyamorous also doesn't automatically mean someone's pansexual. I just want to clarify that. Like, none of these labels necessarily correspond to each other. Think of it as kind of like if you're at a buffet and there's like the salad section and the soup section, and then I don't know, the bread section, and then the dessert section. So like you have your sex, that's the first section, then you have your gender, that's like the next section. You like choose one from each section kind of thing. Or I guess you could choose a couple from each section. And then there's the sexual attraction. That's like pick your combo. And then finally we get to relationship style. So just because somebody is resonating with one label doesn't mean that all of these labels automatically go together. This combination of labels is just what I personally resonate with. So like you can be straight and polyamorous. You can be gay and polyamorous. You can be bisexual and polyamorous. You can be trans and polyamorous, but you can also be monogamous and trans, or monogamous and straight, or monogamous and bisexual. Like, yeah, one of these things does not necessarily equal the other. So now that we've clarified that, these are completely separate parts of identity again. Polyamory is a relationship style. Monogamy is a relationship style. So let's talk a little bit more about what we mean by polyamory. The word literally means many loves, and polyamory is the practice of openly and ethically maintaining more than one romantic relationship at the same time with the knowledge and consent of everyone involved. So the key words there are with the consent and knowledge of everyone. Polyamory is also kind of an umbrella term. Another term that is often used is ENM, which stands for ethically non-monogamous. Getting into all the different types and flavors of polyamory is a little bit out of the scope of this episode. Just suffice it to say that polyamory is the umbrella term. Under that umbrella term, we have ethically non-monogamous relationships. And then there is some debate as to where open relationships go. Some people consider open relationships and swinging to be polyamory, and others don't. I'm not going to get into the weeds about all of that. For the sake of this conversation, the definition that we'll use of polyamory is the practice of openly and ethically maintaining more than one romantic relationship at the same time with everybody's knowledge and consent. Very important. So that's the main thing that makes polyamory different from cheating. Cheating, there is not consensual knowledge and awareness of the other relationship, right? That implies that there is deception and lying happening. That's not the case in polyamory. Anybody that tells you otherwise, they're doing something else. And I think that's part of why polyamory / ENM get a bad rap, because there are quite a few people that kind of try it out or want to open up their relationship without actually doing any research or truly knowing what they're getting into. And so they end up doing things in a way that is unethical and can cause a lot of harm and a lot of trauma, and then gives people a bad impression of polyamory. Like, polyamory is arguably harder than monogamy because it requires a lot of communication, a lot of honesty, and probably more communication than the average monogamous relationship. Polyamorous relationships also really depend on boundaries, people being self-aware within them, people having effective communication skills, and being able to be honest and accountable and emotionally mature. That's tall order, right? So definitely not every polyamorous relationship is healthy, just like not every monogamous relationship is healthy by a long shot, right? Like, relationship structure doesn't magically make people emotionally mature. Just like if a woman dates men and has a lot of trouble dating, just switching to dating other women isn't necessarily going to solve that problem, right? People are still people. But I'll tell you why polyamory has worked for me. For me personally, discovering polyamory wasn't about like collecting partners or having my cake and eating it too. It has nothing to do with that. It's not because one person is, quote, not enough for me. This goes back to that false binary, that illusion, right? Because we've been taught that love is finite, that if I love one person deeply, then somehow I have less love to give to someone else. But the only place that we tend to apply that is in romantic relationships. Like, that's not the experience most of us have of love in other places in our life. If you have 2 children, you still love them both. Like, loving the second child doesn't make you love the first child any less. Same thing if you have 2 cats or 2 dogs. If you have a best friend and then you make another really close friend, you don't just stop loving your first close friend. My point is, our capacity for connection often expands. Obviously, romantic relationships involve different dynamics than friendships or family. Often they involve more time, more emotional bandwidth, and time and energy are real resources. That's why healthy polyamory isn't about just dating around and saying yes and dating everyone. It's about being radically honest about what you're actually capable of offering and dedicating time to the people that fit into that. I am actually single, which I know is objectively hilarious because somehow the non-binary, pansexual, polyamorous yoga teacher has 0 partners, but identifying the way I do doesn't require me to date multiple people at all times. And yeah, because I haven't quite found those few right people yet, a lot of the time it has been really draining. But just like I can't change the fact that I'm pansexual and I've been pansexual my whole life, nor can I change the fact that I'm non-binary and that's how I truly feel. I also can't change the fact that I'm polyamorous and I have tried to be monogamous and it just doesn't work for me. Polyamory is the lifestyle that I know works for me, and it's the relationship style that I know I want to pursue. It feels the most aligned with my values and my emotional needs. And for me, it's about believing that love doesn't have to be controlled or confined through exclusivity. It's about choosing honesty over assumptions and communication with my partner over ownership. And most importantly, it's about choosing freedom and expansion over fear and allowing my partners to choose that too. So, just like everything else that we've talked about today, polyamory isn't better, monogamy isn't more or less spiritual. Neither relationship structure is like correct, they're just simply different. Just like it's not necessarily correct to be gay or straight or cis or trans, right? It's just all different colors of the rainbow, different expressions of the spectrum. At least that's what we believe over here on Queer Soul Alchemy. If you're not on board with that, just see yourself out, okay? But yeah, some people thrive in monogamous relationships, others thrive in ethical non-monogamy, and I feel like I thrive in the ethical non-monogamy space. But the question is, which allows you personally to show up with the most integrity in your relationships? Because yoga isn't asking us to become someone else. It's asking us to realize our true nature and simply uncover the illusion of separation from our true nature. So actually, yoga is just simply asking us to remove the layers between ourselves and realizing our true selves. It's asking us to become more of ourselves. And for me, that journey of self inquiry and self exploration has just happened to lead beyond a lot of binaries, beyond the binary of gender expression, sexual attraction, and a pre written cultural narrative about how relationships are, quote, supposed to look. Whether you're monogamous or polyamorous, gay or straight, cisgender or transgender, or anything else under the sun, what matters most is building relationships that are rooted in honesty, compassion, and mutual respect. And that's going to start with self respect and self love. And I think that's a spiritual practice worth pursuing, no matter who you are. Yeah, relationships can be incredible spiritual work, you guys. And, that relationship with yourself can also be so powerful. And then maybe none of these labels feel accurate to you or describe you. Maybe they actually describe your child or your sibling or your coworker or just someone you'll meet tomorrow. If this episode helps you understand and see that person a little bit better, then I'm glad you're here. And thank you for listening. So, where do you see all of these things for yourself? If we think of those three spectrums of gender, identity, and then sexual attraction and relationship style, where do you feel like you fall within the three spectrums? Share with us in the comments. And if this resonated with you, gave you some insight, or if you identify as you're trans or non-binary yourself, please share this with some of your friends. Hit any of the buttons that you see on your screen. You can't go wrong. Again, it really helps our fellow queer spiritual seekers find this magic. And this might just be exactly what somebody needs to hear in order to understand themselves or someone they love. So, to summarize, in this episode, we unpacked the difference between sex and gender to help explain what being non binary means. Then I shared more about my specific experience as someone that's non binary and pansexual. And I hope that this episode has given you some insight into your own identity and maybe some awareness of how easy it can actually be to interact respectfully with transgender, non-binary, and other gender non-conforming individuals. Finally, we discussed what it means to be polyamorous and how that factors into my lifestyle and identity as a pansexual and non-binary person. Yep, you can in fact be all three things. You can in fact have some non-labely labels if that tickles your fancy. Remember, you guys, your identity isn't a test that you have to pass. It's a relationship with yourself that you cultivate. And the goal isn't to collect labels or partners, but just to know yourself deeply enough to connect with yourself and others and use these tools as a language to describe your needs and advocate for yourself. Don't forget to download your free self-care resource guide by signing up for our email newsletter on the QSA website at youareloved.one/pod. And you guys, please join us for a rainbow yoga retreat for the LGBTQ plus community from Friday, October 2nd to Sunday, October 4th, 2026, because queer joy is resistance. You are invited to this transformational yoga retreat, which is a dedicated safe space provided exclusively by and for queer and trans folks who gather to share a weekend of daily yoga and meditation, healthy vegetarian meals, and connecting with nature. Connect to your innermost self with the healing power of community and with the ancient teachings of yoga. This queer yoga retreat is a safe space for people like us to come together and seek spiritual guidance from within, cultivate deep self-acceptance, and reclaim our power. We do have a scholarship opportunity for somebody in need, and priority for that will be given to applications from BIPOC individuals. We also have several partial work trade opportunities for people with the following skills: yoga instructor, cooking healthy vegetarian meals for a group of 16 people, somatic dance instructor, musician to lead a song circle, and social media content creator. And the minimum requirement for that position is to have 500 followers on any platform. So if you're interested in joining us for the Rainbow Retreat or applying for the scholarship or any of the work trade opportunities, then please apply on the QSA website. To see the schedule, pricing, and lodging options and apply, go to uiloved.one/queer-campout. Thank you guys for tuning in, and until next time, let's stay connected and stay witchy. I'll talk to you soon, and blessed be. With all my love, Lee Davy.